Hello, everyone. Welcome to episode 15 of 15? Yes, 15.
15 million.
Yes. Yeah, that's what it feels like. We have a we have a very very interesting beer for you today from Brooklyn Brewing. This is Fonio Rising. It's a double pilsner, but the reason that we're kind of drawn to this is that it uses an alternative grain when in the brewing process. Fonio is that grain, and it's a native. It's an African grain, and just has some very interesting. A lot of the times we think about when we think about raw ingredients, especially as consumers, I would say. Um, we're thinking a lot about like the flavor and like what it's going to bring to the finished beer. But when you are a hop farmer, when you are a someone who grows barley, there are lots of other things that you're considering when you are deciding whether or not to take on a crop. You're thinking about, is it drought resistant, is it disease resistant, does it have good yield, does it is it do you need to spray it with lots of pesticides, or does it have lots of natural defenses against that? And this it's kind of known as a grain that is very resistant. And if anything, it even has sort of these properties that almost enrich the soil that it's grown in, rather than others where it seems to kind of strip, the soil, and then you have to prepare the soil to plant it again. This seems to have almost the opposite effect. And so Brooklyn partnered and collaborated with Revolutionary African Foods, and they brewed this beer that's made with Fonio. So very, 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 very interesting. I've never had a beer. Have you ever had a beer with this before? I had never heard of it until now.
No, and we talked about this just being a good opportunity because we haven't done an episode about like alternate grain beers, which are truly global, right? Every corner
Right.
of the world has its own indigenous grain varieties and practices, and before especially brewing barley and also corn kind of took over the world, so to speak. It's still thriving in different areas of, and Africa is a ginormous place, by the way. This is a indigenous grain that's grown, I think, in West Africa primarily, but the continent known for all kinds of other non barley like cereal grains, right? They got teff for your Ethiopian food. They grow a lot of sorghum in kind of the southern half of the continent, and we know that sorghum beers are kind of a thing too, as like a kind
Right.
of a gluten-free alternative. And so it just seems like a kind of a cool opportunity both to just see how the grain presents in the beer, which is also brewed with regular malted barley as well. So, it's not going to be like, I think, totally foreign to us. But also, maybe it'll help improve some of our flavor descriptors too, especially when you're talking about malt descriptors
Mm-hmm.
or bread or grain type descriptors. We kind of recycle a lot of the same ones, because we're used to the same kinds of bread or whatever. And so it's a nice
Yeah.
opportunity to try something a little bit different.
And there's, and really there's only maybe, you can work within some different parameters. You can get some different kinds of Pilsner malt, but when you kind of go to when you're going kind of like higher up, there's really only like a handful of malts that get used, pretty consistently. So yeah, it is nice to have a new, sort of a new kid on the block that could potentially bring something fun, something new. The information that Brooklyn provides that I could find, 6.4% ABV. Couldn't really find any IBU info anywhere, which is fine. We have palates to talk about perceived bitterness, so not that big of a deal there. And then the three hops that they use are Pearl, Hellertau, and Saaz, or I forget what the actual name is. I promised someone that I would start.
Zatech?
Yeah. So one thing I wanted to talk about, though, because this is an alternative grain, I wanted to talk about some things that maybe, I kind of talked about what maybe growers would want to consider when trying to, see if they want to take on an alternative grain or a crop of some kind. But when you're looking at as the brewer, obviously flavor and how it's going to present to the customer are a big deal. But obviously, there's an entire process that it has to go through and has to do and has to perform well. And so, what are some things that you can think of that you would want to be considering or looking at if you're looking at an alternative grain for brewing?
Well, I mean, the reason that we've slid so comfortably into barley as the primary beer brewing grain is it has a lot of the, especially when it's malted, the enzymatic potential to create beer, to convert starch into sugar. And so I think that would be the first thing that you would look for is
Yeah,
what's kind of the enzymatic potential of the alternate grain that you're looking into potentially using, and also just the literal physical structure of it too.
yeah,
Barley is nice because it's got a husk that helps you create a little bit of a filter bed when you're brewing. It's got a really nice gelatinization point that isn't going to like gum up your mash. And other grains have that we know of have the potential to do that. I don't remember if actually don't know if the grain used in this is the fonio grain is malted or not, or if it's just
mm,
like dried fonio. I don't even know if you can malt fonio. So what do I
yeah.
even know? Period. But those are definitely some of the considerations. What is the enzymatic potential of the grain? Do you need to supplement it with any other types of grains? And then what are the physical properties of the grain that are just literally going to help, hopefully, with some of your filtering the mash process and your lautering. How viscous is the liquid going to be?
Yeah.
All kinds of stuff. Anything
And
else you
these
can think
are,
of?
well, I mean, these are a lot of the problems that we've had to solve because, so much beer has been brewed with corn and rice. Those
Mm,
things don't have, like you said, don't have husks. They have very different physical properties. They're obviously great because fermentable extract is extremely high, but then they also lack protein, which is why for a long time they were brewed with 6-row barley, which had extra protein, like you said, extra enzymes, higher enzymatic activity than 2-row. With the proteins specifically, you need those so you can extract FAN or free amino nitrogen and have that for yeast health. I think exactly what you said. Does it even need to have any previous treatment? Do you need to malt it?
yeah.
If we were able to find something, we were had a long conversation in our study group about raw barley brewing, and if there was something that could come in that would need little to no previous treatment and could just be added to a mash tun and have a lot of positive properties, that would be quite attractive.
Yeah, and
So
all those considerations are magnified fairly linearly with how high of a percentage of the grist you want to use the alternate grain for, right? Because
absolutely,
you can just use it for flavor, right? If you like people do that with rye, even though you can malt, and rye has decent enzymatic potential. It's also just a flavor that you can add to a grist composition. And so maybe that's kind of what we have in this situation, where we have what I think is essentially pilsner malt, and then we're kind of like adding a different grain to give it, maybe it helps you play around with texture, flavor, and not just the literal like fermentation capacity of the wort that you've created. So it could just be for flavor too. We'll see.
yeah, and you're right. Ultimately, one of the biggest impacts is going to be flavor. Uh, that's would be the ultimate cherry on top. So, without further ado, let's start digging into some sensory. So,
I can tell you, it looks the part of whatever a double pilsner might be. Mine's
yep,
quite clear.
yeah, it's
Um,
ridiculously clear.
yeah, it's kind of like a really light gold,
Yep,
um,
yep,
color,
yeah.
and the
Mine,
foam is,
yeah, it's white, it's fluffy.
yeah, and it seems
So,
pretty consistent too.
mm,
It kind of smells the part of Pilsner. You know, I'm
I
getting,
would have to, yeah, I would have to agree. Hmm.
yeah, I'm getting a lot of just like noble hop variety. I think the Zaz is jumping out at me a little bit. It's very like kind of a mixed bouquet of herbs, rosemary, thyme, maybe a little bit of like garden mints, you know, that kind of earthier mint
Yeah,
character.
yeah, I like the time. There's a little bit of I get a little bit of like cardamom. There's a little bit of like lime zest. There's a little bit of I get a little bit of black pepper. I get a little bit
Cardamom's a
of
great note.
green like green melt like under I would actually yeah underripe like it's underripe fruit. It's like underripe green melon. You know, very bright fruit, not like fruit that's been sitting around and has a lot of um, and has become ripened and kind of has that depth that you get from
Yeah,
a
it's like
ripening
the honeydew's
process.
not quite ready yet.
Yeah, exactly. And I get a little bit of that. It's almost like mango like skin,
Hmm.
but but you're right. There's definitely I'm not super familiar with pearl hops, so I'm wondering what that is all kind of bringing to the table. But there's also this kind of underlying like sesame cracker um, malt note.
Yeah, sesame cracker is a good way to explain it because there's something that is, you get a lot of what I think is a Pilsner malt-like aroma. It's kind of crackery, sweet, almost like a tinge of honey character. But there is like a grainier, almost heartier and aroma, and I think that sesame is a good way to explain that. Kind of nuttier too.
Yeah, it's almost like we just we there's all these different variations of Chex Mix bags that you can get, and one of the ones it always comes with kind of like the darker rye chip. Oh, it's like a they're like I think they're like bagel chips is almost
Mm,
what they're like. It's kind of like that because it's not kind of that like doughy bready character. It's a really dried. It's slightly and but it's very. I mean, if there's even sort of a toasty note at all, it's very light. But it's actually a really nice. Um, it's a really nice take on it because I think again it's pushing us kind of away from our like you said our usual like freshly baked bread and toasted bread crust and it
hmm.
kind of reminds you that like there's these other sorts of grain characteristics and for people that we interact with or help study for exams, especially when it comes to descriptors, I think malt is one that people struggle with quite a bit.
Yeah. Well, and what's interesting, I went in for a couple of sips, and a lot of that transfers to the palate. But what's introduced is there is kind of like a creaminess to it. There's a roundness to the malt. It's not
Yeah.
like when you drink a normal, quote unquote normal pilsner. Pilsner, you don't have to have a normal pilsner. You can play around with it if you want. But it's almost like biting into a cracker, right? It's a kind of
Yeah.
like mimicking the snappiness of the body in the finish. And this has some things that are reminiscent of that snap in terms of the hop character, but the malt character, the grain character, is much rounder. And that's more doughy, even though we weren't smelling dough
Right.
kind of in the same way that we do with some of these other beers. It tastes a little bit more doughy, which is cool.
Yeah, that's a very interesting note. I had a session today with people who are studying that I'm coaching who are preparing for the advanced Cicerone exam, and we were talking a lot about flavor description and talking about what a particular beer smells like, and then how that, like you just described, how does that sort of translate onto the palate? Is it the same? Is it different? What do we think is changing it? What else is coming into play? When you take a sip, and I think one of the big things is obviously like you're starting to introduce all of the tastes into all of a sudden these things that maybe you perceived as being sweet or bitter or sour, all of a sudden you kind of get uh, the real deal once you actually take a sip. And you're right. I think the carbonation helps with that perception
Mhm.
as well, for sure, because this is definitely medium high. Like this is medium high carbonation. It's pretty well.
Yeah,
But
and
yeah,
there's
it
also
kind of feels like it's gonna be yeah. You think it's gonna be crisp, but on the mid palate, it's kind of just like I'm not like just like it's not super dry. Very
yeah,
interesting.
and there is almost a it's not significant, but there's a little bit of film on the palate, almost
Hmm.
like a beer brewed with a lot of oats or a lot of wheat. Where if the beer can be crisp otherwise, you can make IPA, for example, with some wheat or some oats, but it kind of like rounds out the malt expression a little bit, and you are left with a little residual carbohydrate. It's not just like bone dry.
Yeah.
But we've also got to remember that there's a little bit of extra alcohol compared to our normal pilsner here
Hmm.
too. Six
Yeah.
6.4, so it's not like a ton of extra alcohol.
Yeah.
It's not one of these double pilsners that's 7, 8, approaching 9%, more like Maibach territory. Um, but the alcohol, is playing into that in conjunction with the grains as well. So
And I wonder. Well, one, I totally agree. I think the alcohol actually is somewhat perceivable, and to me, it's giving a nice little kind of like dried white, like flower petal type of florality. And I think
mhm.
it's gorgeous. I think especially with the two noble hops that are used, I think it's great. But I said before I wasn't all that interested in the IBU count, but now I kind of am, because I'm wondering if that finish that you're talking about, where the film is left over, that would usually probably be a kind of wiped away by a firm bitterness in something like a
Mhm.
pilsner. And so I wonder if that was a conscious decision from Brooklyn to say, what, we actually kind of want, it's we're featuring this ancient grain, so why don't we just lay off the IBUs on, or maybe go to the lower end of what we would call pilsner, because again, like, what that's a fairly general, what is pilsner. um,
Yeah.
that's a quite can be quite general, but yeah, I wonder if that's a conscious choice to kind of feature the grain a little bit more and let the grain linger.
I would imagine so. I don't. Garrett Oliver doesn't strike me as a man that makes a whole lot of subconscious or unconscious choices. He seems very you know methodical, if not poetic, about the way that he approaches food and drink. So my guess is it's quite intentional, and it makes sense from the perspective of just a drinker drinking the beer. Is when I hear alternate grain lager, it would almost think that something in the vein of a Helles would be the first approach that I would want to take, because you don't want the hops to get in the way of this new experience of trying exactly how this grain fonio comes through. But I think they've sort of done that when they've upped the ABV, so the body of this beer is a little bit bigger. The alcohol is a little bit bigger, and guessing the exact IBUs is a bit of a fool's errand. But it tastes like the lower end of Pilsner IBU territory on the bed of a 6.5% lager. So you get some of those firm touches of hop flavor in the mid palate, but the roundness of the malt expression, that you're getting, really, it's leaning in that direction in the finish more so than like some ultra crisp traditional Pilsner.
Yeah. Well, now that we've kind of got an idea of what we're working with. I mean, in the past we've tried beers that neither of us had tried before, that were new to us, but this is kind of in a different realm. So we were kind of talking beforehand about how food pairing might be um, a little challenging, but I'll start with the first thing that I came up with. I mean, I just thought, if I'm thinking that this is just going to be an imperial pilsner, then I'm probably just going to start with like one of the like cheat codes for beer and food pairing, which is fish tacos. I
Yeah.
think you can, and I think with all of the, I wasn't expecting, I knew what hops were in here, but I wasn't sure what kind of treatment they were going to get. And I think there's so much here that's going to play well with fish tacos. I mean, all of these really bright underripe, fruit notes. These are just going to those are going to just land onto the fish, whether it's grilled or pan-seared or fried, whatever it is. This is going to be a great contrast to whatever that is. It's going to brighten up all of the fish. It's going to complement whatever mango salsa or whatever, or avocado crema, whatever you've got on there. Those are going to be great. Those are going to be some amazing compliments there. That underlying doughiness and that you get on the palate, and some of those kind of grainier notes are going to play well with I'd say maybe lean more towards like a corn tortilla as opposed to something like flour, to kind of
Yeah.
get into kind of that same realm. But I mean, I'm sure you could play with a little bit with either one. And I also always like tortillas with beers like this, because you get a little bit of a range of, because when you cook a tortilla and you get a little color on it, there's just little kind of specks of it. So there's still doughy parts, and and I feel like that's kind of what Pilsner malt does for beer. There's a little bit of a toasted edge to it, but it's not just like biting into, like a crouton, that's been like heavily toasted or whatever. There's some different, uh, some different flavor profiles going on, and I feel like a tortilla is a good representation of that, and gives a little bit of that flexibility in terms of pairing. So yeah, kind of went with one of the cheater pairings for a beer like
You
this.
got to, but you know what's awesome about that is this the body is big enough, and the flavor is big enough that you don't have to go super light on the fish either. This would
Yeah,
stand up to a bigger fish flavor than just sometimes the cheat code is really you do like mahi mahi or some white fish that's a little bit more delicate. That would still be incredible with this, but I think that you could do shrimp. I think you could do
yeah,
shrimp tacos with this, which
I
has
agree.
just a little bit denser of a seafood type character to it, because you've got a little bit extra flavor here. That's gonna the intensity match is great. So I
Yeah.
think that's awesome, and the avocado really rang true with that. Either just chunks of avocado or avocado crema, like you were saying, really match up that creaminess to creaminess there, and that's my main idea. I think that we have such a difficult time pairing beer with pasta, and we want pilsner to work there, but sometimes the body of German pills is just too low, and you're just
Yeah.
left with kind of this like tingy bitterness. And I think that maybe this beer comes to the rescue with an Alfredo. We're doing some white pasta. We've got some creaminess of the body that's a good complement, and maybe some canceling with the just really big creaminess of what's an Alfredo. And then some of those like milder fruity flavors are going to be a great complement to the dairy in the dish. But then also the spice character is not just one to one either. I think we're
Hmm.
drawn to Pilsner as a possible pasta pairing because of that hop character is in that realm of rosemary, thyme, oregano. It's kind of like in that henge of herbs, and this I think could fit there really nicely. So this is my new pasta hack. Hopefully, maybe that'll work. And it's important. I think we kind of mentioned this and alluded to it a little bit, but we haven't had this beer before, and we're trying to do this a little bit impromptu, which you have to do in situations where don't go in with a preconceived notion about what you're going to pair with something, and then not budge, right? Because if it doesn't comport with your understanding of what the beer was going to taste like, it's going to be a failure of a pairing. So it's good to either pick something that is very flexible, like fish tacos, that you can play around with the ingredients a little bit, or change your idea entirely if the beer doesn't meet your expectations in terms of profile. And so that's what I did. I kind of tried to keep an open mind, and that just really different creaminess of the body makes me think this could be really nice with fettuccine alfredo.
Absolutely. And then another thing I want to make sure to try and start doing, I always forget this, but one of the reasons Chris and I do this is that it's a studying opportunity for us. It's kind of it can be sort of a planned train of thought, sometimes more of a free sort of train of thought, if we ask each other questions kind of on the spot. But one of the things we're really having to dig into for the next sort of level that we're preparing for is cheese. So I did a lot of digging into what could potentially go well with this, and I picked a few different ones, just kind of trying to hedge my bets a little bit.
Yeah.
But there's a unpasteurized cow's milk French cheese, and it's called Abondance PDO, and it's never heard of it before, but I was reading through a description. I kind of looked at some stuff online. I've never had it before. Well, once you get into like unpasteurized cheese, that's just like a whole discussion about why we can't get that in the United States.
Yeah.
But some of the it says it has kind of a supple texture, kind of bends gracefully, aromas of gently cooked milk and and a light florality, and then flavor, warm spices and red fruits. Thought that could be super duper interesting, because again, I was kind of like, where we can go with saws. I'm again not sure what Pearl was going to bring to the table, but obviously it's bringing some sort of kind of citrusy fruit character. So I thought maybe that could be an interesting cheese pairing. But again, that's even more theory than anything else, because I haven't even tried the cheese. But it sounds like it, and after tasting this, it sounds like it could be. Well, I mean, honestly, this beer is just going to go well with cheese. It has a lot going for it. That's going to make it relatively easy to pair with
Oh my goodness!
cheese.
And one thing I like with a lot of pilsners is some Alpine cheeses, but sometimes you have to not pick too intense of an Alpine cheese, because it's just gonna totally kind of bowl over the pilsner, especially if it's something in the 5% or less range. And I think this would stand up to some of those a little bit more flavorful Alpine cheeses. Those like cave aged, they kind of have this vague minerality that really pairs well with kind of what some of the water profile is telling you with some of the pilsners. And so I think that would be really nice with this too.
Yeah, I was looking at that too. Kind of cave aged Gruyere was kind of immediately where I went for something like this. That was definitely on the list too. But where did you land for dessert? I'm feeling a little bit better about potential dessert, because trust me, Chris and I were both drinking this, and we were just like, all right, what do we have? What are we working with for bitterness? Because that's gonna be a to do.
Yeah. It has become a fallback of mine with some of these paler beers to pick some kind of lemony dessert. And since I'm pairing this on the spot, I'm going to do the same thing. But what I think it could be really nice with is like a lemon curd type dessert. So you could either kind of make that into a little bit of a fruit tartlet with some lemon curd in it, or honestly, you could just have lemon curd, like a really really nice lemon curd by itself.
Mm-hmm.
You had pointed out the cardamom note earlier, and I think that's such an important note for this beer. It's not outwardly cardamom like, but there is a spice. There's an herbal and floral component, and cardamom is just like so floral to me that makes a ton of sense here too. And so another pairing that I think could be kind of nice with dessert, and that I've had before, is like a cardamom scented rice pudding.
Mm.
So you're introducing another grain. You're making a little bit of a rice pudding. It could be a little bit of cardamom, a little bit of cinnamon, um, but it's kind of like light, and the rice is cooked and kind of chewy, and it's in this like gelatinous, kind of like pudding texture. And I think that when you said cardamom, that sent off the rice pudding flair in my mind, which you can also get a lot of international cultural cuisines will do a rice pudding with some like star anise or cardamom, or something that's got kind of that floral herbaceous component to it. So yeah, cardamom scented rice pudding I think could be good as well. So I used my little lemon crutch, but I also thought of something new. So see what happens when you just are put to the test. What do you think?
I agree. I mean, when you are smelling, just like freshly crushed cardamom pods. I mean, I think you just kind of have to lean into that. It's going to be a relative rarity, and I think rice pudding is a really really good um, base for that. That caught me off guard, but it makes a lot of sense. That's not something I had considered. Uh, one of the things that, even though we've talked about how this could potentially be challenging, obviously when you see that it's a pilsner and there's not a mention of some like alternative, like color of some kind, like we're kind of assuming that it's going to be a paler color. And that's one of the beauties of food pairing, is that because you don't want to be just matching like so extremely perfectly, you can still just kind of work your way into whatever sort of lighter, even if it is a doughier dessert or a cake like dessert, which is kind of where I went, kind of looking into like a much lighter, either like angel food cake or yellow cake, kind of in that area. But I didn't really have to worry about like, well, is the beer going to taste like like it has that kind of malt profile to it? Like that's the wonderful part, is that that's almost the opposite. So there,
Mm.
even though we are kind of maybe pigeonholed because we didn't really know what we were pairing with, there is a little bit of information in the fact that when you have when you build upon complexities like that in pairing, it's what makes it even more enjoyable. And so I just landed on strawberry shortcake.
Ooh, I like
Strawberry,
that.
just trying to not be too trying not to get too sweet, but I think even with the kind of whatever shortcake frosting you put on this, I think this is um, going to be good. And I think with this much fruitiness and all of the spice character, I think uh, what I thought maybe would at the beginning of the episode might have been kind of the watch out, actually could turn into the thing that really creates the canvas for what could maybe be the most exciting thing about the pairing. Because yes, the fruit and all that stuff kind of pairing up with the strawberry, that's all well and good, but I've just had dairy and fruit forward beers too many times, and it's just one of the best aspects of pairing, and a personal favorite of mine.
Well, you know what else that calls me to as well is strawberry basil is a kind of a classic combination, and you're going to get a little bit of that
That's
impression there. You know what I mean?
Oh
This
my
is
gosh,
it's
yes.
yeah, it's
Oh,
just like getting some fresh sprigs of basil on your strawberry shortcake. That
oh
just
yeah,
brightens up the whole deal.
yeah. Oh, that's a great. Love that. Love that addition. And I mean, we should be talking about this every time we talk about any of our pairings, but obviously this thing has like everything going for it for cutting. It's the ABV's slightly elevated. The carbonation is there. It's not, again, it's not a firm or sort of a overt bitterness, but it's still got all those powers combined is going to cut through just about any dish you put in front of this. Not too many things that are going to be left behind.
It's right in that ABV wheelhouse we like to for
Yeah,
food pairing, which is, anything in that like 6 to 6.5. I know that's kind of a narrow window, but
yeah,
it's it can play a little bit above its weight and a little bit below its weight probably too,
yeah.
because you don't have to worry about some 4.5% lager just getting completely bowled over by the food. Something that's a little bit bigger, this can punch up a little bit, which is really really nice. And so alcohol is kind of like a flavor driver, just like salt and um, sugar and all kinds of things, and it carries a lot more flavor with it. So it gives you a lot of opportunity to play around a little bit, and so that's why it's kind of comforting, even though the flavors are kind of mostly savory, even though there's a little bit of fruitiness. I think it's turning out to be, by the end of the pint, one of the better like pale lager dessert pairing beers, because
Hmm. Yeah.
you don't have to worry about hedging your bets against sweetness and creaminess quite as much as you normally would with something that's a little bit lighter. So that's really nice.
Yeah, it really is kind of sitting in that, not as kind of like we literally threw some gypsum, into this German pills like snappy, but it's also not like this is, 100%, Czech Bohemian, floor malted Pilsner malt, and it's just like, rich, medium full body, tons of bread, and there's there's Saaz hops in there too, but it's the malt is also driving the beer to it. Kind of sits in the middle somewhere, which opens again,
Mm-hmm.
like you said, gives I think some flexibility, and it reminded me because I just thought I remembered the episode that you did with Brian on Pilsner Kill, and I think I asked a question about what to look out for a pairing like that, with Pilsner Kill, and he's like intensity. He's like I don't know,
Yeah.
like just like the most basic thing, and besides that, and I think this is like kind of pushing into that range, because I would even say for folks that Chris said he kind of gave a tight ABV range. Expand that to like 5 to 7 and see if you find
Yeah.
something different. I know we like California Common and stuff like that, and things like British Brown Ale, and those are kind of in that 5 to 6 range. A lot of the commercial examples. So, and again, it's great because you're getting intensity, it's bitterness, and you've got alcohol, but you're not going to be accentuating anything over like capsaicin. If you're wondering why we like, all of those things, and again, nothing is overtly, it's not overtly sweet, overtly bitter, or sour. There's not just one big overarching thing that we kind of have to contend with that can be a problem. And I think you're right. I think this fits beautifully in there, and we don't need to theorize all day about what the Fonio does. It made a good beer. That's kind of what matters right now.
That's the thing. Be adventurous in your drinking and in your pairing, and try not to go into it with preconceived notions, particularly if the brewer is not communicating that it tastes exactly like some other style. Then, open mindedness is the key. And I think we accomplished that tonight. I think it's, we went into this not knowing what we were going to get ourselves into, and still a lot left to learn as well. And I think that's what it's all about for us. So appreciate that.
That is definitely an awesome place to start wrapping this thing up. Um, Announcements before we officially wrap it up. Next week we have Ublon Schoof IPA, and then kind of it's weird. We've talked about the first 35 episodes that we did of this. You all are probably wondering, this is only episode 15, but we did 35 episodes of this on Instagram Live before we decided to move to YouTube, and in 2 weeks it'll be our 52nd episode total, which would be about which we're going to kind of be calling our 1 year anniversary. And so we're going to be doing and I want to give folks a couple of weeks, because we definitely were able to find a special beer. It's from the brewery out in Placentia, BRUERY, and it's called Petite Mardi, and it's kind of this like stout wine, play hybrid type thing. So if you have a brewery that's doing beer and wine hybrids, that's using this, I think this one is an imperial stout with 2 different types of Syrah grapes that are used in the recipe. So if you've got something like that, whether it's a sour beer or a stout or a barrel aged beer or not, find a beer that's where the brewer has decided to play with wine or wine grapes in some way. So that's kind of the thing we're going to do to celebrate a year of doing all of these. So yeah, track down those beers. Thanks for tuning in. Make sure to like the video. Make sure to subscribe to the channel. Follow us on Instagram. We're at the Beer Enthusiast. Chris is Fresh Beer Enthusiast. I'm the Vintage Beer Enthusiast. And cheers, and to open mindedness.
Cheers to that. Appreciate y'all.